Number 14. Star Trek, Section 31. An emperor tends bar, an ex-boyfriend has a bomb, and 94 minutes feels just like an eternity in this week's edition of Star Trek. This technically counts as a movie. Captain's Log. Stardate January 24th, 2025. Years in the making, Section 31 was billed as the first long trek on Paramount Plus. They talked of it as the 14th movie of the franchise. What we got felt more like the remains of an aborted first season of television, sewn together into a movie made for people that were half paying attention on their phones. Every 5 minutes, the movie grinds to a halt to remind us who the characters are and what little plot there really is. Starring Michelle Yeoh as Philippa Georgiou, we find her running a bar on a space station after being sent back from the 31st century. A member of Section 31 comes to pull her out of retirement and get her back in the saddle, which would have been really interesting if we had actually seen her operate as a member of Section 31. But that's the main fault of this movie. There's so much telling and almost no showing. In the opening, we see a young Philippa Georgiou in the Mirror Universe having completed a Hunger Games style competition for the throne of the Terran Empire, which would have been a way more interesting movie than what we got. I kept wanting to watch that movie, which is a bad sign. I also seriously thought about stopping halfway through the movie's 94-minute runtime to work on my taxes. During an interview with Robert Kaczynski on Trek Culture, he described how the movie was made not strictly for fans, but to bring in new people to Star Trek. And to be honest, if it does that much, I'll call it a win. Bottom line, Section 31 has the production value of a modern Star Trek bottle episode, the writing staff of Kevin Sorbo's Andromeda, and the editing coherence of Madam Web. Number 13. Star Trek, the motion picture. Kirk is bad at being a captain, Spock is hearing voices, and McCoy grows a beard as the giant evil cloud floats slowly toward Earth in this week's edition of Star Trek, Underdeveloped Filler. Captain's Log, December 8th, 1979. The best idea that this movie has is making James T. Kirk human. He's a man who is hyper successful at one thing, and that's being the captain of the Enterprise. Everything else in his whole life builds off of that. And that's why he can't move on. So when the V'ger cloud makes its way toward Earth, he spares no time hopping back on the Enterprise just to relive his glory days, pushing out the current commander, Captain Decker. It makes Kirk look petty and very, very human. And that, my friends, is called character development. But for a movie so concerned with the scary cloud coming for Earth, the plot doesn't start moving until 54 minutes into the runtime, with Spock telling Kirk and McCoy that he sensed the presence while on Vulcan. But before that, much of the film seems like a collection of cool ideas for scenes that had no bearing on the main plot. As soon as they leave space dock, 38 minutes into the runtime, Kirk is demanding warp speed. And everyone on the ship is saying, "Hey bro, the engines aren't ready." And he's like, "Just do it anyway." And then they get sucked into a wormhole and nearly die from how rusty Kirk is at being in charge. It's a good idea, and it plays on Kirk's development and just making him look fallible and less than perfect, which is great. But also, it has no bearing on the plot outside of, oh, he sucks now. And much like Section 31, the motion picture started production as a television series, morphing into a movie with the success of Star Wars. But instead of taking their time, the film began production with an unfinished script. And it shows. Bottom line, Star Trek the Motion Picture understands just how big of a deal it really is. It has a big screen budget and wants to show you every single dollar in their production value. The sets and special effects look gorgeous. The music is swelling. The costumes are peak 70s pastels. But the story often grinds to a halt to show you how pretty it is. It's the beautiful stranger winking at you from across the bar who seems so sophisticated only when the music is too loud for them to speak. Number 12. Star Trek Nemesis. Picard and Data dive into the meaning of existence while the rest of the crew fades into the background in this week's edition of Star Trek. They should have let Riker direct this one. Captain's Log. Stardate December 13th, 2002. Star Trek Nemesis has always had a special place in my heart. It was towards the end of the TNG era and was the first Trek movie that honestly felt like it was mine. It was dark and epic in scale. The assassination of the Romulan Senate and the rise to power of a mysterious young clone of Jean-Luc Picard. The question of nature versus nurture at the heart of the film and a quest for vengeance. It should have been a hit, but it suffers from the opposite problem of the motion picture. This movie should have been longer. On the deleted scenes introduction, Rick Berman talks about how the first cut of the movie was 2 hours and 45 minutes, and then they whittled it down to under 2 hours. That meant some of the best character scenes in this film were cut, leaving it feeling hollow so they could keep the pace moving. There's a deleted scene that takes place directly after Riker and Troy's wedding, where Picard and Data talk about the passage of time, the transition of the crew going their separate ways, and Picard contemplating all of the choices he's made. This scene, if it were left in, could have served as a mirror for when Picard meets Shinzon later in the movie, contrasting both men and serving to elevate the film as a whole. It would have been a classic Trek movie scene, on par with Picard grieving the death of his brother and Star Trek Generations. Instead, it was sacrificed in favor of runtime and action scenes that, while impressive, were never going to be the primary driver of fan interest at the time. Bottom line, as an end to the TNG era, Nemesis serves as a poor capstone. Many of the character moments meant to say goodbye to the crew were cut in favor of dune buggy chases on desert planets. But the movie has aged well, now only being a chapter of Star Trek and not a finale. Its development of the Romulan storyline, in combination with Star Trek 2009, led to the most interesting parts of Star Trek Picard Season 1, not to mention fun cameos in Star Trek Lower Decks. Number 11. Star Trek Into Darkness. Spock teaches Kirk how to feel, while Uhura feels neglected in this week's edition of Star Trek Just Playing the Hits. Captain's Log. Stardate May 16th, 2013. There are the bones of a new interesting idea buried deep inside the member berries. Section 31. A secret clandestine organization is developing a new superweapon. One of their agents, John Harrison, goes rogue and starts committing violent acts of terror against the Federation. That idea itself is enough to carry a movie. But the creators behind this movie didn't have enough confidence in their own idea, so they leaned into the greatest hits of the franchise. John Harrison is secretly Khan Noonien Singh. A Badmiral wants to manipulate Starfleet into a war with the Klingons. Kirk is still a dog of a bloke, but newly found father figure and man most likely to die in service of the plot. Admiral Pike has his back. All of this feels safe and very, very familiar. But in the last act of the movie, They nearly do something that could have justified its entire existence. Instead of Spock dying to fix the warp core, the movie kills Kirk. And for a moment, it seems like the new course set by the destruction of Vulcan would continue into strange new worlds. But unlike its predecessor, it doesn't have the courage to set itself apart. It inserts a Kirk saving reset button with magic triple blood when the Kelvin timeline moving forward with a dead Kirk and a Spock in the captain's chair would have created something so new and unique, it would have revolutionized the franchise. Bottom line, as the middle chapter of Star Trek's midlife crisis, Star Trek Into Darkness spends too much time telling everybody how young and sexy it used to be, paying only surface level attention to the lore of the franchise while taking zero chances. Number 10, Star Trek Insurrection. Worf gets his it, Data throws a fit, and Picard hits on older women in this week's edition of Star Trek Fun and Flirty Over 40. Captain's Log. Stardate December 11th, 1998. The Federation, after studying the success story that was the global war on terror, decides they want to do an imperialism so they can get their beach bodies back. Picard hooks up with the age appropriate, pretentious space hippie of his dreams, decides imperialism is bad, and then takes all of his senior staff on a week long field op to protect the space hippies from being forcefully relocated. At the end of the movie, Picard says he has just over 200 days of shore leave saved up, so really, couldn't all of this have been avoided if he just went to, like, Ryza once in a while? Bottom line, this movie began as The Heart of Darkness in space. It finished as a breezy, low stakes romp against imperialism with space hippies. It's fun and family friendly. One of the Trek movies that got me started as a young kid, complete with sing alongs. While it's better paced than the motion picture and a more coherent story than Nemesis, Star Trek Insurrection would have been a great two-part season finale of the TV show. As a movie, it lacks the epic punch of the stronger entries of the franchise. Number 9, Star Trek The Final Frontier. Spock and McCoy work through their daddy issues as Kirk pays no attention to the man behind the curtain in this week's edition of Star Trek. Now it's Shatner's turn. Captain's Log. Stardate June 9, 1989. I so love what this movie tried to accomplish and how far it fell short. The opening shot of Kirk climbing a mountain summarizes his character so well. A man unable to stand still, desperate for another summit. If each man hides a secret pain, Kirk understands the torment of life by experiencing each moment in search of possibility. Under the camp fun of this piece is an exploration of how we deal with the pain of existence. Those unable to process their pain place it at the feet of their messiah and the film's misguided antagonist, Cybok. Inspired by the rising televangelist of the 1980s, Cybok makes people face their pain and draw strength from it. But by having Cybok as the conduit to peace, he remains a vital component to it. It keeps his followers reliant on him, thereby placing him in a space of great power in their lives. This is a false peace because it is not independent of Cybok. Kirk knows that true peace is not given to you by some outside force. It's won by growing and developing yourself as a person. He deals with his pain by finding another mountain to climb and a world to save. To do anything else would be to numb yourself against reality when life is so big and so grand if you want it to be. But the grandeur comes with a cost, and that's Kirk's pain. He's lost a lot, including a son. David Marcus isn't mentioned by name, but his ghost haunts Kirk in the film. Or at least it should have. The ideas presented on processing pain are sadly watered down by the 1980s sitcom level jokes. During Kirk's ascent upon the mountain, he slips and nearly plummets to his death via obvious green screen and wire work. He's caught by Spock, zooming around in rocket boots, and says to McCoy, "Hi, Bones, mind if we drop in for dinner?" It's a fun tone this movie sets. The goofy silliness of the jokes and the fun interaction of this movie made it one of my favorites as a kid. As an adult, it will always have a special place in my canon. But like Star Trek Insurrection, the campy fun diminishes the possibility of the piece. Number 8. Star Trek Generations. Data has emotions while Picard suppresses his in this week's edition of Star Trek Once More with Feeling. Captain's Log. Stardate November 18th, 1994. The absolute best part of this movie is in the opening prologue. Kirk, Chekhov, and Scotty are guests of honor on the maiden voyage of the Enterprise B. Soon, there is an emergency. Refugee ships are caught in an energy ribbon. The Enterprise is the only ship in the area. Its inexperienced commander, Captain John Harriman, sends the ship in to help. As Harriman quickly runs out of ideas, he turns to the team of living legends on his ship for advice. Kirk says to move into transporter range, beam those people aboard the Enterprise. Harriman is taken aback. But what about the gravimetric distortions? They'll tear us apart. Kirk smiles, places a comforting hand on his shoulder, and tells him risk is a part of the game if you want to sit in that chair. Then the Enterprise takes heavy damage. Someone has to go make the repairs. Harriman turns to Kirk and says, "I'll go. You have the bridge." Kirk slowly takes the chair as the music swells. And for a moment, as he sits down, he finds the purpose stolen from him by retirement. But then Kirk tells Harriman, "Your place is on the bridge of your ship. I'll take care of it." Because, like in The Final Frontier, Kirk knows that his purpose and peace are not found from external forces, but from within. His time in the chair is over. To take over Harriman's chair, even for just a few minutes, would be an act of numbing himself against reality. Kirk would be no better than Cybok's followers. The opening prologue gives Captain Kirk the hero send-off he deserved, saving the Enterprise one last time and giving his life in service to the future. Bottom line, when I was a kid, we wore out the VCR watching this one. For years, it was the only Star Trek movie we owned, and it was the first one I saw in theaters. It made me a sucker for the old gunslinger movies, where the cowboy goes off for one last ride. Shatner, being the eternal cowboy, gives the movie earned gravitas and depth. When he's not on screen, however, it feels like a big budget episode of The Next Generation. It does good work in linking the two captains, with Picard's loss of family reflecting Kirk's loneliness in retirement. Teaming up Kirk and Picard is a fun scene for the fans, but to be honest, I wish they just let him go out like a hero on the Enterprise B. Number 7. Star Trek 2009. Kirk fails upwards while Spock is down to clown in this week's edition of Star Trek Once More with Caffeine. Captain's Log. Stardate May 8, 2009. This movie takes huge swings. During the opening scene, George Kirk dies, saving his wife and child. This ripple effect leaves James T. Kirk growing up in the shadow of his dead father, crashing cars and getting into bar fights as the world passes him by. One day, Captain Christopher Pike picks him up off a barroom floor and tells him, "Your father was captain of a starship for 12 minutes. He saved 800 lives, including your mother's and yours. I dare you to do better. The pace of this movie is relentless. While its predecessors seemed tired, this movie is youthful and energetic. Kirk reprograms and defeats the impossible to beat Kobayashi Maru training simulator, causing him to be put on academic probation. Soon, Vulcan is under attack by a space drill, and Spock is placed in command as Kirk, Sulu, and Ensign Redshirt perform a halo jump to disable it. Here we get to see Sulu as a fencing master, besting Romulans and saving Kirk's life. John Cho shines as Sulu, bringing a grounded toughness to the role that would last for the rest of the trilogy. But it's after the destruction of Vulcan that the mechanics of the story stumble. At this point, Captain Pike is a prisoner on Nero's ship, and Spock is in command of the Enterprise. Kirk has been promoted from academic probation to first officer on the flagship of the fleet for seemingly no reason, and then he gets into a brawl with security officers on the bridge of the Enterprise as the crew discusses next steps. Then Kirk is marooned on an ice planet and meets Old Spock and Montgomery Scott. Old Spock tells him he needs to be captain of the Enterprise because the story needs him to be captain of the Enterprise. So Scotty does a special super transport and gets him back to the Enterprise. He must get young Spock to show he's emotionally compromised and therefore unfit for command. Once Kirk accomplishes this, Spock relieves himself, and then Kirk is captain of the Enterprise. This all feels very contrived and makes me wish the story didn't need to see Kirk be the captain. It could have given him a movie or two or a trilogy to grow into leadership without worrying about him being the captain and still see the original series characters and how they all got their start. Bottom line, I was 22 years old and halfway through combat medic training when this movie came out. It hit me at just the right time where I was beginning my own adventure. While I have such love for the TNG movies, this film blows them out of the water with its relentless energy and sharp characterization. The courage the movie has in destroying Vulcan makes up for the clunky second act, allowing it to swing for the fences and connect far, far more than it misses. Number 6. Star Trek Beyond. The Enterprise gets stung by bees while Kirk rides a motorcycle and Spock says his final goodbye in this week's edition of Star Trek. The third time is the charm. Captain's Log. Stardate July 22nd, 2016. This movie is the best of the Kelvin Timeline trilogy. The Enterprise responds to a distress call on a mysterious world outside of communications range. It's attacked and destroyed by a swarm of space bees. But even though this is the fourth time that we see the Enterprise destroyed on the big screen, this is a new and terrifying way to do it. Afterward, the crew are stranded and split up, but everyone gets something significant to do. Sulu and Uhura are captured, giving exposition to the audience. Spock and Bones pair off and explore Spock's grief over the passing of his time-traveling older self, played by Leonard Nimoy, while Kirk and Chekhov search for the MacGuffin on the ruined saucer section of the Enterprise. Scotty meets Jayla, who lives on the crashed USS Franklin. The former captain of the USS Franklin is a Starfleet officer turned energy vampire named Krall. He was stranded on that planet over a century prior, thinking the Federation had abandoned him. But really, life just passed him by. His human name was Balthazar Edison, and he lived a life of war, fighting the Xindi and the Romulans. But once those wars were over, Edison had trouble accepting peacetime because a soldier fights the war to keep society safe, and they thank him for his service. But the society moves on, and the civilians just want to live their lives. However, the soldier is defined by the war, having sacrificed his peacetime self for the betterment of a civilian populace that would rather not think about it. It's infuriating because moving on from the war feels like an invalidation of the trauma that Balthazar Edison went through. He feels forgotten and spends decades plotting his revenge. He wants to commit acts of terror against the Federation to put them on notice, to remind them of what war is, to remind them of who Balthazar Edison was and what he went through. Because that's the underlying desire for the villain of this movie, to not be forgotten. Bottom line. Co written by Simon Pegg, this movie is light on nostalgia and heavy on adventure. It's fast paced and fun. I so enjoy how the stakes are not galactic. Krull just wants to destroy Starbase Yorktown. It has all of the energy of Star Trek 2009 while not overly relying on member berries like Star Trek Into Darkness. The only problem is that it's the last movie of a dead timeline. The film lost $50 million at the box office, and at the time of recording, no sequel is in production, which is a shame because this movie has aged incredibly well and is some of the best Trek in decades. Number 5, Star Trek The Voyage Home. Spock is feeling fine as the crew goes back in time for this week's edition of Star Trek There Be Whales Here. Captain's Log. Stardate November 26, 1986. Much like Star Trek the Motion Picture, A Voyage Home has a mysterious probe making its way towards Earth, draining the power of everything it passes. Unless the crew of the USS Enterprise can formulate an effective response, all will be lost. But where the motion picture takes 54 minutes of runtime to get started, The Voyage Home has Kirk, Spock, and McCoy working on a solution by minute 23. By minute 28, the plan is in place. And the call to action is summarized succinctly by McCoy when he says, "You're proposing we go backwards in time, find humpback whales, bring them forward in time, and hope they tell this probe what to do with itself?" At no point does the movie even say why the probe wants to talk to whales, because the movie knows it's unnecessary. Once the adventure is underway, the movie is a fun fish out of water story set in then present day 1980s San Francisco. Much like Star Trek Beyond, the crew are all split up and have important plot functions. Kirk and Spock look for the whales. Scotty and Bones find a transparent aluminum manufacturer. Sulu secures a helicopter while Chekhov and Uhura raid a nuclear vessel to power their stolen Klingon warbird. All of these missions are accomplished with a sense of light fun and excitement until Kirk goes on a date with Dr. Gillian Taylor, caretaker of two whales in San Francisco. There is a race against time, as the crew must save the whales from hunters out in the open water. But thankfully, Scotty retrofitted the Klingon warbird to house the whales, and after they're beamed aboard, Spock does his computations for time travel, getting them back home. Bottom line, The Voyage Home presents an inviting, easygoing end to the Genesis trilogy. The Enterprise crew saves the day yet again and is rewarded with a brand new Enterprise to make up for the one that they crashed. Leonard Nimoy pulls double duty, portraying Spock and serving as the film's director, creating a piece that shows what Star Trek could be. No evil admirals or clones, just a fun romp through 2 hours that leaves everyone, Trekkies and civilians alike, glad they came along for the ride. Number 4. Star Trek The Search for Spock. Spock gets laid while the Enterprise gets destroyed in this week's edition of Star Trek Kirk Just Remembered He's a Dad. Captain's Log. Stardate June 1st, 1984. From the opening of the piece, Kirk is in shock. Spock is dead, and the Enterprise is to be decommissioned while Dr. McCoy slowly goes insane. As the middle chapter of the Genesis trilogy, The opening does a wonderful job of showing Kirk at his lowest until Ambassador Sarek shows up at Kirk's apartment and tells him there's a chance to save Spock. This movie expertly puts the Enterprise crew against both Starfleet and their oldest enemies, the Klingons, showing Scotty disabling the Excelsior as Uhura holds a young lieutenant at gunpoint while Kirk and Sulu break McCoy out of jail. This culminates in the heist of the Enterprise, leaving the space dock in the dust as they warp toward the Genesis planet in search of Spock. This film brilliantly mirrors the Wrath of Khan without being a carbon copy. Kirk regains the Enterprise while an old enemy hunts the people he loves as the Genesis project continues to cause chaos. When the Enterprise arrives at the Genesis planet, Kirk defeats Krug and saves Spock, but his son David is killed, and the Enterprise is sacrificed in order to win. Bottom line, the Wrath of Khan humbled James T. Kirk, showing him what it was like to lose. The search for Spock humbles Starfleet, showing a Kirk with nothing else to lose, running circles around them to get Spock back. Number 3, Star Trek First Contact. Data Max on Picard's ex-girlfriend, while Counselor Troy gets hammered in Montana for this week's edition of Star Trek Functional Alcoholism. Captain's Log. Stardate November 22nd, 1996. This is the best of the Next Generation films because it's not trying to be the TV show. Picard's oldest enemy, the Borg, are on a direct course for Earth. The fleet is massing to meet them, but the Enterprise is told to stay out of the fight. Because the last time the Borg made a run for the planet Earth, Picard had been captured by the Borg and was leading the charge as Locutus of Borg. The Federation forgave Picard, but they haven't forgotten what Locutus did. Starfleet engages the Borg without the Enterprise, costing them dearly. Then Picard sends the Enterprise to lead in the final defense of Earth. During the battle, the Borg create a time tunnel back to the past, looking to stop Zefram Cochrane's first contact and assimilate the planet Earth before the Federation. The Enterprise pursues, and Picard goes to war with his demons as they invade his ship and assimilate it, one deck at a time. As Picard leads a losing battle in orbit, Riker is on the ground in Montana, getting Zefram Cochrane sobered up and ready to make first contact with the Vulcans. Cochrane never expected the future to land on his doorstep and then call him a visionary. He just wanted to get laid. Surprisingly, Data is the only one who comes close to copulation, meeting Picard's ex and becoming a rebound for the Borg Queen. She's really just trying to make Picard jealous, of course. But hey, who wouldn't want to taste of Patrick Stewart, especially in his 90s prime? Bottom line, expertly directed by Jonathan Frakes, this movie showcases Picard as the action hero so much better than Star Trek Nemesis. The Borg stalk the dying crew of the Enterprise as the film moves back and forth from sci-fi epic to war film to claustrophobic horror, with light moments of fun on the surface of Earth to break the tension. The film does a wonderful job of redeeming Picard. The shadow of Locutus hangs over every inch of film until the very end when Picard kills the Borg Queen and saves the future. Now, he can forgive himself. Number 2, Star Trek, The Undiscovered Country. Kirk gets framed as Spock splits hairs in this week's edition of Star Trek, Retirement Party. Captain's Log. Stardate December 6, 1991. The Undiscovered Country is more of a sequel to The Voyage Home than The Final Frontier. The Klingon Empire is crippled, and the Enterprise is sent to begin peace negotiations. The Chancellor, however, is assassinated, and both Kirk and McCoy are framed. Spock must figure out what happened and stop a war before it's too late. It's in this film where the shadow of David Marcus looms large over Captain Kirk. Ever since the Klingon commander Kruge killed his son in the search for Spock, Kirk's rage against them has only grown. He's furious at Spock when the Enterprise is volunteered to be the peace envoy for the Klingon Chancellor Gorkin, when he says, "You know how I feel about this. They're animals." But James T. Kirk can't get past the shadow of his own failure to see the future. "Don't believe them," he yells at Spock. "Don't trust them. Let them die." This conversation resonates throughout the entire film. As Kirk unravels the conspiracy, he sees his own words thrown back at him by younger members of the Enterprise crew. They are the future of Starfleet, and Kirk sees the failure of his hatred poisoning their generation. That tribalism, like the release of pain in the final frontier, is unifying. Members feel safe in the tribe, regardless of the bloodshed it causes. But like in the final frontier, Kirk knows safety isn't found in tribalism, but in personal growth. That is the example he shows the Federation as he beams down to Camp Kittimer to stop the assassination attempt and save the peace conference. There, Chancellor Gorkin's daughter tells him, "You have restored my father's faith." He nods and tells her, "You have restored my son's." Bottom line, unlike the cartoonish camp of its predecessor, The Undiscovered Country is the perfect send-off to the original series crew of the USS Enterprise. Number 1. Star Trek: The Wrath of Khan. Kirk is behind on his child support, while Spock substitute teaches Starfleet in this week's edition of Star Trek Absentee Parenting. Captain's Log. Stardate June 4th, 1982. James T. Kirk is a dashing hero. That guy is exciting and sexy at 29. But when he's 50, he's alone. He doesn't even have a family, at least not one that wants to talk to him. Until one day his ex-lover and mad scientist Carol Marcus calls, asking, "Why are you taking Genesis away from us?" Kirk doesn't understand what's going on, but knows just how dangerous the Genesis project is. Or, in McCoy's words, universal Armageddon. To prevent such Armageddon, Starfleet Command sends the Enterprise out. This film puts Kirk back in the driver's seat much more effectively than in the motion picture. He doesn't have to scheme for it, like he did with Decker, refusing Spock's offer more than once before succumbing to the voice in the back of his head. The greatest success he's ever known, being the captain of the Enterprise. While on their way to Space Station Regular 1, they run into film antagonist and man most likely to beat you in a push-up contest, Khan Noonien Singh. Jim Kirk dumped Khan and company on SETI Alpha 5 15 years prior and never bothered to check on their progress. Khan and his followers have taken over the USS Reliant and then proceed to beat the crap out of the Enterprise. This deepens the pattern of people who have a long-standing relationship with Jim Kirk. They either don't want to talk to him or they want to kill him. After escaping Khan, they continue on to Space Station Regular 1 to look for survivors. Kirk calls Spock for a status update. Spock tells him, "If we went by the book, hours would seem like days. Main power will take 2 days for repair. Warp engines will take 5 days." In the context of the movie, this is a brilliant move by two senior experienced officers. They know Khan is listening somewhere inside the area of operations, and the warp engines will be repaired in under 5 hours. Main power in 2. Narratively speaking, this also gives the plot a reason to slow down and breathe for a second, because the movie has shifted into a family melodrama where Kirk meets his son, David Marcus. Hours, seeming like days, shifts the expectations of the audience in such a way that when the plot slows down to breathe and explore the family dynamics, it doesn't seem out of place. Bottom line, The best thing this franchise did was make James T. Kirk human. They attempted this in the motion picture. In The Wrath of Khan, it's focused and perfected in its imperfections and the description and depiction of Captain James T. Kirk. He is practically incapable of having a long term relationship with anybody who has not served on the bridge of the Enterprise. This gives such wonderful depth to a character, making him a real person. This film has aged incredibly well, becoming an 80s science fiction classic that I watch nearly on repeat. After the mediocre reception of Star Trek the Motion Picture, director Nicholas Meyer turned death into a fighting chance to live as he reinvented the franchise for Star Trek The Wrath of Khan.